The envelope was handed to me the morning after the funeral. No ceremony. No hushed whispers. Just a firm, professional hand from the estate attorney and the sharp scratch of a manila folder being slid across a desk. It was sealed tight, heavier than I expected, with 3 bold words handwritten on the front in deep black ink: "Do not open." Underneath, my name. Not my husband's. Not any of her children's. Mine. I remember blinking at it. Not in shock, not even confusion, just stillness. Because somehow, I already knew this wasn't going to be something I could ignore. The attorney didn't explain much. Just said it had been among Marjorie's private files, marked for personal delivery after the funeral. No instructions. No timeline. Just that label, like a silent dare. When I got home, I placed the envelope in the drawer of my nightstand and closed it gently, like setting down something alive. I didn't tell my husband. I didn't mention it to his sister, who had barely spoken to me since the reading of the will. I said nothing to anyone. Because the moment I saw that handwriting, something shifted in me. I didn't know what the envelope meant. But I knew it wasn't just paper and ink. It was a trigger. The week that followed felt like limbo. The family splintered in the usual way, some grieving loudly, others passively aggressive in group chats, some just vanishing into their routines. My husband acted like the will had been fair. Like nothing had gone missing. He didn't ask questions. Didn't wonder aloud why his mother's charitable contributions were absent. Why her longtime caretaker had been left out entirely. Why the woman who had once proudly said she was leaving a legacy had left nothing but a cold legal document that barely scratched her life's meaning. He didn't ask because he already knew. I found myself standing over the drawer late at night, fingers brushing the handle but never pulling. The words kept echoing: "Do not open." Not a suggestion. A command. One meant to protect someone. Or something. By the 4th night, I sat in bed alone, the lamp casting a soft glow across the room. The silence felt heavy. Intentional. I opened the drawer and stared at the envelope. It didn't look ancient. It wasn't dramatic. But it felt like a weight I couldn't explain. I lifted it, held it in both hands. The seal was firm, untouched. But something inside it shifted slightly. It wasn't just a letter. My hands moved before my doubt could stop them. I broke the seal, slow and quiet, like peeling back something sacred. Inside was a stack of documents. Neatly folded. Crisp. On top was a single sheet of lined paper, handwritten, unmistakably Marjorie's script. It began simply. "If you're reading this, it means they gave you the envelope. That means they think it no longer matters. That's their mistake." I stopped breathing for a second. I didn't trust them to honor what I built. And I certainly didn't trust them to preserve what matters. But I trust you. Because you've never taken. Only protected. That's why I left this to you. My throat tightened. She wasn't a sentimental woman. She didn't throw around words like that. I turned to the second page and saw the first line of what looked like a will. Not the one they had read aloud at the firm last week. A different one. Dated 3 years earlier. Signed. Witnessed. And unlike the one they had filed, this one named people they had quietly cut out. This was the real version. The one they buried. And I was holding it now, trembling, not from fear, but from the weight of what I already knew I was about to do next. I placed the will on the table carefully, smoothing the creases with both hands. The paper felt old, but not worn, well kept, as if it had been waiting for this moment. I scanned the names slowly. It didn't take long to notice what was different. The first beneficiary listed was not my husband. Nor his sister. Nor anyone in the direct line of expectation. It was Marjorie's late brother's daughter, Cynthia. A woman no one had mentioned in the reading. A woman I vaguely remembered from years ago, who walked with a cane and kept to herself during family events. She had disappeared from the gatherings after some quiet argument no one ever explained. And here she was, front and center in the original will. A trust set aside for her, explicitly worded, to ensure she never has to choose between food and medicine. The second name was a scholarship fund. A local program Marjorie used to volunteer with in her younger days, marked with a substantial donation. Gone from the version I sat through in the lawyer's office. And the third name, mine. I read it 3 times before I accepted it was real. Not some clerical note, not a scribbled margin. A clause stating clearly that I was to be the alternate executor should the original choice, her own son, prove untrustworthy or fail to disclose the entirety of her estate. There was even a paragraph explaining why. If my son attempts to suppress or modify this will in any way, the authority to carry out my final wishes passes to the one who has stood quietly, with integrity, through years of tension. She had known. Even as she played the matriarch at holidays, even as she smiled at his jokes, she had known what was brewing behind the curtain of inheritance and control. And she had prepared for it. There were receipts. Letters. A copy of the signed, witnessed version of this original will. A notarized directive giving me, by name, permission to reinstate the original version if any discrepancies or coercion were suspected. The directive wasn't written with warmth. It was clinical. Sharp. Designed to hold up in court. And then, tucked behind those pages, I found a shorter note. Just for me. Less formal. It looked like it had been written in a hurry, pen strokes uneven, wording less precise. But the message was unmistakable. You're probably scared. I would be too. But I gave this to you because I knew you'd do what was right. Not for revenge. For the truth. I held that note in my hands for a long time. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't even about power. It was about the fact that Marjorie had watched her own family rewrite her wishes, erase her values, and package it all inside a will that looked legal but was, at its core, a lie. And she had entrusted the real version, the truth, to someone she knew they'd never suspect. Me. Not because I was important to them, but because I wasn't. And that's what made me the safest place for the truth to land. I sat in the quiet for over an hour, going over the dates, the witness names, the language of the directive. My heart wasn't racing. It was steady. Focused. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was just certain. This envelope hadn't been a gift. It had been a responsibility. And the more I read, the more I realized, this was no longer just about what Marjorie wanted. It was about what they had tried to bury. And how, now, it was mine to unearth. The next morning, I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the original will again. The ink hadn't faded. The signatures were crisp. The witnesses were real names, not placeholders. Every word carried weight. But what struck me most was how quiet the betrayal had been. Because now that I had seen what was missing, I couldn't stop seeing it. It was in the way my husband had said, the lawyer took care of everything, after the funeral. In the way his sister had called the updated will efficient and said, it's better to keep it simple, right? In the way Marjorie's old caretaker, Clara, hadn't even been mentioned in the estate conversation, despite having lived with her during her final year, feeding her, changing her, keeping her company while the rest of them showed up once a week for polite check-ins. At the time, I had chalked it up to grief. To denial. But now I understood. They hadn't forgotten these people. They'd erased them. And they'd made it look tidy. I started going back through my memory like a detective flipping through a cold case. I remembered one dinner, months before Marjorie's health declined, when she had asked to speak to me alone after dessert. Everyone else had gone out to the patio. I thought she was just tired. But she had looked me straight in the eyes and asked, "Do you think people still follow through on their word when no one's watching?" I had said yes. Now I understood why she'd asked. She'd seen what was coming. By noon, I made a call to the lawyer who had handled the will I'd been shown. A polite woman named Deirdre who had served the family for years. I asked if I could come by and review the filing. She hesitated, but agreed. She had no idea what I was holding. When I got there, she pulled out the file with the kind of practiced indifference you only get from handling hundreds of estates. She laid it out, the revised will, dated 2 years ago, just months before Marjorie passed. Clean. Professional. Unchallenged. Only one witness listed, the husband's coworker. The other? A family friend. I asked if she had seen a prior version. She paused. Said there was an earlier draft. But it wasn't final. Was it signed? She hesitated again. I believe so, but your husband said there had been pressure to change it. That Marjorie wanted to simplify. Did she say that herself? Another pause. She wasn't well by then. It was assumed. Assumed. That's how you bury someone's intent, in soft words like that. You say they were confused. You say they changed their mind. You say they must have wanted this version, because it's what makes the rest of the family comfortable. Because it's easier to believe they simplified out of kindness than to admit someone erased a legacy for convenience. I thanked her and left. In the car, I stared at the copy of the new will she had printed for me. It was shorter. Less specific. Void of spirit. No mention of Cynthia. No charity donation. No trust funds for anyone outside the core family. Just cash. Properties. Divisions. Clean, cold lines. And my name? Not even a footnote. I thought about Clara, the caretaker who had called me 2 weeks after Marjorie passed to say, she always lit up when you walked in. And how I hadn't been sure what to say in response, because I hadn't known how much that meant at the time. But now I did. Now I knew everything she had tried to say without saying it. And now I had to decide what I was going to do with the weight of her final whisper. I didn't tell my husband right away. Not because I was scared. Not even because I wanted to spare him. But because silence gave me time to move without interference, time to verify, to document, to build. And most importantly, to prepare for the moment when truth would no longer ask for permission. I brought everything to my own attorney, Ellen, sharp-eyed, seasoned, the kind of woman who didn't waste time asking how you felt before she told you where you stood. She sifted through the documents with surgical precision, nodding as she flipped from the directive to the original will, from the dated signatures to the letter Marjorie had left in her own handwriting. No hesitation. No confusion. This is real, she said. And enforceable. Then she asked the only question that mattered. Are you ready for what this will set off? I didn't answer right away. I looked at the envelope. Torn open now. Its message clear. I nodded. She filed the motion that Friday. Quietly, quickly. No public drama. Just a formal request to suspend the execution of the current will and submit the original for probate consideration. In legal terms, it was a clean move. A procedural correction. But to my husband's family, it landed like a bomb. By Monday, my phone was lighting up with calls. His sister left a voicemail that started calm and escalated into shouting. My brother-in-law sent a long, furious email quoting the law as if I hadn't consulted an attorney. My husband confronted me in the kitchen. You're trying to rewrite her death. I shook my head. I'm honoring her words. The ones you helped erase. You don't know what she wanted. I do. I have it in her handwriting. I have the original will. I have the directive she signed. You buried it, and you thought she'd never trust anyone enough to dig it back up. His jaw tensed. He reached for the counter like he needed something to hold him steady. She changed her mind, he said, almost pleading. She told us she didn't want the drama. She wanted to keep it simple. No, I said quietly. You wanted to keep it profitable. He stared at me like I was someone he'd never seen before. And maybe, to him, I wasn't the same. Because I wasn't backing down. I wasn't playing the part of the understanding daughter-in-law anymore. I wasn't soft. I was certain. The judge issued a stay that week. Probate proceedings were frozen pending a full review. My attorney requested access to the estate's original files, and subpoenas were sent for witness testimony. And then came the part one didn't expect. Cynthia found out. I didn't even know how. Maybe someone slipped. Maybe she had been watching from a distance all along. But she reached out, by letter. Short, handwritten, the ink a little shaky. I never expected to see her wishes again. I thought they'd buried her twice. Thank you. Just 3 lines. But they hit harder than any accusation my in-laws had thrown at me. Because this was what mattered. Not the money. Not the property. But the truth that had been gagged and hidden and repackaged in legalese until it no longer resembled the woman who had raised them. Marjorie had known this might happen. She'd left the documents, yes. But she'd also left instructions. A voice that had whispered from the grave, "You are the one I trust to set it right." I wasn't fighting for myself. I was fighting for that voice. For the woman who had been slowly edited out of her own goodbye. And now, finally, she was about to be heard. The hearing was set for a Thursday morning. No fanfare, no cameras, just a quiet courtroom tucked on the second floor of a plain municipal building with flickering lights in the hallway and a coffee machine that hadn't worked in years. But inside that room, something real was about to unfold. Not theatrics. Not spectacle. Just truth, clean and sharp. I arrived early. My lawyer, Ellen, had advised me not to speak unless directly asked. "Let the documents do the talking," she said. "You're not here to fight them. You're here to remind the court that she had a voice, and that they tried to erase it." My husband arrived next, followed by his siblings. They didn't look at me. His sister wore a carefully neutral face, but I saw the tightness in her jaw, the panic just under her lipstick. My husband looked tired. Not like a villain, just like someone who had bet everything on no one asking the right questions. And now that the questions were coming, he had nothing left to say. The judge, a silver-haired woman with a clear, measured tone, opened the hearing by stating the facts: a contested will, a newly submitted document, questions of authenticity, questions of intent. Then Ellen stood and began presenting. Page by page, she laid out Marjorie's original will, marked with dates, signatures, witnesses. She explained the notarized directive, its legal standing, its clear language. She provided the sealed envelope, photographed and documented. And then she handed over the handwritten note, Marjorie's voice echoing off the courtroom walls even in silence. "If my son attempts to suppress or modify this will in any way, the authority to carry out my final wishes passes to the one who has stood quietly, with integrity, through years of tension." There were no gasps. No shouting. Just silence. That kind of silence that fills a room when no one can spin the story anymore. The other lawyer tried to object. Claimed it was confusing. Claimed Marjorie had changed her mind in her final year. And yet, Ellen said, there is no video, no written declaration, no new directive, nothing to override this one. All they have is assumption. And fear of what this truth will cost them. Then the judge turned to me. "Did you open the envelope immediately?" "No," I said calmly. I waited. I didn't know what it was. I didn't want to dishonor her. But when I did open it, it was clear she meant for it to be found, by me. "And you believe this was her true intent?" "I know it was. She told me, in her own way, long before she passed, that she didn't trust everyone around her. I didn't understand it then. Now I do." The judge looked at the papers again. Then she spoke plainly. This court finds the submitted directive legally valid. The original will, dated prior to the contested version, with no evidence of coercion or fraud, will be reinstated. The estate will be distributed accordingly. The named executor, Mrs. Grant, is hereby recognized. It was done. No yelling. No drama. Just the sound of shuffling papers, the quiet intake of breath from people who had built a future on a lie, and just saw it collapse. As we stepped out into the sunlight, Ellen turned to me and said, "That's what justice feels like. Not loud. Not fast. But whole." I thought about Cynthia. About the scholarship fund. About the caretaker Marjorie had wanted to include. People no one had fought for. People who would now be remembered, because one woman had written them into her legacy, and another refused to let that be erased. The others didn't speak to me as they walked by. They looked through me. But I didn't mind. They had spent their grief rewriting the story. I had spent mine restoring it. The first thing I did was write the checks. Not out of vengeance. Not for optics. But because that's what she asked for. The scholarship fund received its endowment in full, with a note attached, in memory of Marjorie Helen Grant, who believed every young girl deserves a start. The letter they sent back included a photo of the first 3 recipients, none of whom I knew, none of whom knew me. That was the point. This wasn't for recognition. This was repair. Next came Cynthia. Her address was harder to find. The last known record was a small apartment across the state line. When the trust was transferred and the letter arrived, she called me. Her voice was slow, like someone trying not to break mid-sentence. "I thought they'd buried everything," she said. "They tried," I replied. She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. Some things pass between women not as gratitude, but as recognition. She'd been erased. I'd been ignored. And yet here we were, 2 names Marjorie hadn't forgotten, even if everyone else had. Clara, the caretaker, received a check too. Not charity. Compensation for the year she poured into a dying woman while the rest of the family focused on assets and appearances. She wrote back a 2-line email. "I always said she had more fight in her than they thought. Guess I was right. The house stayed in the family name. Not sold. Not gutted. I didn't want it. But I didn't want them to have it either, not out of bitterness, but because it wasn't earned. So, I placed it into a trust managed by a local historical foundation, converted into a community retreat space. Quiet. Restorative. Just like the woman who once filled it. My husband didn't speak to me again. He moved out fully by the end of the month. No dramatic declarations. No confrontations. Just packed boxes, a hollow silence, and a shared understanding that too much had been seen to be unseen. His sister sent a letter through a lawyer, questioning the court's decision. It was dismissed. They tried to pretend I had taken something from them. But what I had done was simple. I'd removed their fingerprints from a woman's final words. One afternoon, I sat in Marjorie's old reading room, now cleared out, the curtains open, sunlight spilling across the hardwood. I held the envelope again. Torn. Fragile. But still whole. On the back, I hadn't noticed it before, just a faint smudge of ink, like her pen had slipped before she sealed it. It looked like the start of a word. Maybe she had meant to write something more. Maybe not. But the silence of it all spoke louder than anything else. She hadn't left me riches. She had left me a responsibility. And in fulfilling it, I found something she had once told me in passing, long ago, after a holiday dinner when the others had already left the table. Sometimes the quietest person is the only one who hears the whole truth. At the time, I thought she was talking about herself. Now I know she was talking about me. She trusted me not because I was family by blood, but because I was never trying to take anything. I just listened. I remembered. I watched. And in the end, when the dust settled and the truth rose back to the surface, it wasn't her children who protected her wishes. It was the woman she left a sealed envelope for, because she knew that doing the right thing doesn't always mean being liked. It just means refusing to stay silent when the truth finally knocks.